go ahead and start. So we'd like to welcome all of you who are joining us here today in our third session. This is with Marie Kretlow from InVision, and I'll let Marie introduce herself in a couple of minutes. Just want to welcome all of you who joined from a previous session or are joining us new. And Marie is somebody I've known for a couple of years. She provided a really fascinating case study in our 2020 annual report, and she was part of a session earlier this year, a webinar that we did. And she's just been a really generous contributor with our HX Leaders Network. So we have a formal network and an informal network. So the informal network is this group here today. This is a good example where anyone can join in and listen to how different companies, different organizations are using design thinking and agile frameworks to create the human experience. We also have a more formal close group of HX or EX heads like Marie, and we do every quarter after this. So typically after our summit, the next day, we have a closed session where EX heads, heads of analytics, et cetera, can share directly the project work that they're doing, ask one another questions, and really have a sharing platform for that and lightly facilitated. So Marie's been a really generous contributor in that platform as well. Marie has a fascinating company with InVision because they're a group of people who have always been virtual, always been remote. So the reason why I asked her to do the webinar earlier this year and asked her what she was doing more recently is because this is the way they always work. So I thought it would be really interesting. She shared with me a few weeks ago a fascinating story about how they're using design thinking in the domain of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she had a fascinating story to tell, and that's why she's here today. So without any further ado, I'll turn the time over to Marie. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Elliot. Really kind introduction. I appreciate it. Oh, goodness. Let me see how I can share here. Here we go. All right. Hey, everyone. Super great to be with you today. Thank you again, Elliot, for welcoming me here. I'm really excited to chat with you all today. So as Elliot mentioned, I'm going to be chatting through a case study on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what I really want to focus on for this talk is the importance of listening, and really listening with intent, listening to hear folks, and listening for empathy, and then turning that into ways that you can take action. So that's really what I will be focused on today. So as you know, I'm Marie with InVision. I've been with InVision about 3 years, and my background and career prior to that was really in the world of digital user experience design or digital product design. So I use those same methods in a new space now, a different type of ecosystem where instead of outward facing customers and clients, my customers are now internal. So I have the pleasure of serving our employees here at InVision. And I've really had, oh, thank you. Thanks, Damon. Let me see. Okay, let me try that again. Here we go. How's this? Better?
That's great.
Thank you. Okay. You know, every time you're never really sure what screen you're going to be sharing. So I'm over here. Yeah, so in my time at InVision, I really had the pleasure of working on a ton of really interesting experiences. So last time I was here, I got to speak about onboarding. Since then, I've gotten to do some really interesting and exciting work within the realm of diversity, equity, and inclusion, all things internal communication, thought a lot about engagement, particularly given the pandemic and broader socio challenges that we're all facing right now. So I've had a chance to do a lot of really interesting things at InVision, and I'm really happy to share how we weave learning into all of that today. So what we're going to be talking about, what I would love to talk to you about today, is leveraging research in employee experience design. And research here for like really focusing on deep listening for understanding, like I talked about at the top. And not only that, not only understanding for you to know what you need to go build and design, but also leveraging listening as a way to connect with your users and give them a space to feel seen and heard and really ultimately valued. So before I dive into these three topics here, so we'll cover listening in the basics. I'll share with you a case study on how we designed belonging, or how we leveraged listening to help us design for belonging. And then finally, a couple quick tips on how you can get started today. But first, I would love if, Elliot, you could share the poll. And we'd just love to hear from this group on how you're conducting research today, if you're conducting research today, and what that looks like for you. So I'll give that a couple of seconds here.
So if there are other things that you're doing, please write those in the chat, since we don't have an open text option in
Yes.
Zoom. So we've got 9 out of 14, 10, 11. Almost everyone has voted. Great. So 2 more seconds and we'll close this. And we won't do any recounts, sorry.
Oh, excellent. Wow, everyone is running surveys. That's fantastic. Ooh, and lots of folks are also conducting user interviews. Oh, okay, great. Well, I'm thrilled to see that. That's exciting. For those of you who are observing your users, I want to talk to you. How have you figured out how to do that in a remote environment? I would love to know, so come find me on LinkedIn later. All right, before we jump into this topic, I'm going to share a little bit about what Envision does and kind of who we are as an organization, so you can just have that in the back of your mind as I walk through some of this content today. So Envision is a digital product design platform, and we pride ourselves in empowering some of the world's best in class user experiences. So Envision, you can kind of think of Envision, it is a SaaS product, a software as a service product, and it's really the cornerstone of the product design process for 7 million people at tens of thousands of companies across the world, including 100% of the Fortune 100 and brands like Airbnb, Amazon, HBO, Netflix, Starbucks. So those are the folks we serve externally. And internally, we are a group of 500 plus employees, and we work from our offices all over the world. And as Elliot said, we have always been remote. We've always been a remote company. We're still remote right now, and we'll be remote well into the future. All right, so now that you know a little bit about us, I'm going to dive into the content here and really start with the basics, or listening 101, research 101, and talk about kind of why that's important, how that can help you in your design process, or help you as you build out employee experiences, and kind of how it works. Where does that fit in your world of design and program and product creation? So before we talk about what that looks like and how you can go implement that today, would love just to really underscore why this is important and what the benefits of a comprehensive learning strategy are. So number one here, listening, research can really help provide great context for you. So you have a greater understanding of kind of what's happening across your employee experience, what's happening in those key moments that matter, what's happening in your different processes and programs. Research and listening to folks and getting an understanding of their perspective can really help you get a sense of the ecosystem that you are creating. And secondly, and I touched on this a little bit at the top, a listening program is a great way for you to prioritize feedback from your users and really bring them into the process with you, deeply understand their needs, and also welcome them into helping you create solutions as well, which is a huge boost for morale and overall engagement. Folks really feel like they have a stake in what you're creating. You are listening to them. You're bringing their perspectives into the process and even inviting them in to help you solve for that, which is really cool. So as an overall practice, the goal of listening is really to inform you of your user's perspective, build that deep empathy for them, And in EX design and listening, I pull from a lot of the same principles that we use in user experience design and research. A lot of it is very similar, but done in a little bit different cadence and done in a little bit different way, given our customers are always with us, which is kind of cool. So diving into what research is here, research and listening. So what this is in practice, it really helps us both collect data and then organize data. So that's kind of what you see here with discovery and synthesis. Discovery really helps us with that data collection, and then synthesis helps us with that data organization. So when we have the data, we've organized the data, we know the themes, it is in a great place for us to be able to take action on it. So you walk away with key insights and outcomes that you need to achieve with how you are designing your programs. So as you think about discovery, just think about that data collection. What types of activities happen there? So here you might run desk research, where you kind of collect all the information you already have and take a look at the landscape through that lens. You might observe your users, which some of you said that you are doing, which is super neat. All of you are running surveys. I don't have to talk about that one. You already know what that looks like. You might do interviews here, both for stakeholders as well as users. You could do that interview in a little different format and actually run a focus group. And something that I think is really interesting and pertinent for remote life is running cultural probes or diary studies and having your users actually document what's happening in their day-to-day life with regard to their experience. So that's pretty cool. And then once you have all that research and you start to organize, start to define your themes, you move into the synthesis phase. And you really start to aggregate and pull out those key insights. And ways that you might do this could be creating a research wall. So I love to use Envision's whiteboard tool to do that. It's super flexible to toss all of your insights out there and then start to organize them into different themes. You might generate a key insights report, which is super handy for your stakeholders to go take action. This might look like a journey map, or a systems map, or an empathy map. You could also plug in your data into personas or jobs to be done or user stories. And through that synthesis, that's really the connection point between data and action, which is pretty cool. So this is a little bit of the messy middle, right? I think in design, we all go through that phase of the messy middle where you're trying to figure out what you really need to solve for and what that solution might look like. And organizing your data process in this way really helps to do that with clarity. So as you think about the types of data that you collect in discovery and then move through synthesis, it's really important that we think about this in a couple of different ways. So quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative feedback, quantitative data, as the name suggests, is really about quantities and numbers. And this helps us with like facts and measures and really having an objective understanding of what's happening in that experience. On the other side, it's also really important that we collect qualitative data. And this is really more focused on understanding user behavior and helps us understand that human perspective and the human side of the experience. So I like to include both of these things. It's super duper important. And really the way that I think about it as I'm designing research programs for Envision is to think of the quantitative as the what. So as you look at your body of quantitative data, that kind of helps inform you what direction you need to be looking in. And then qualitative is a really nice add to that, where it helps you understand the why. So for example, if you see really great applications coming in at a certain point during the candidate experience, you're like, wow, we've never seen that before. That is quantitative data. That's the what. We see a huge increase in number through a specific application funnel. On the flip side, maybe you dig in and start talking to some of those candidates who applied there on the qualitative side to understand why they're applying there. So you can use that the two sides of data there to really come up with a holistic picture of what's happening on both the what and the why. So thinking about this, so now we know kind of what research looks like, that discovery to synthesis to action process. We talked about the different types of data that need to go into that collection on the quantitative and qualitative side. Now I'd like to zoom out a little bit and talk about when this happens in the design process. So I think a lot of times we think about research happening at the beginning. It's kind of more of a strategic input, or we think about it happening at the very end where we do user testing and try to validate the designs that we have already created. But really, listening is something you can do and should do throughout the design process. So in the beginning, yes, definitely need to dig in on the research side, build empathy for your users, define your problem set, do this through discovery and really that generative research side. So you're really exploring the problem space at that point and trying to figure out what you need to solve for your users and gaining a deep understanding of their experience. So once you know the problems you need to solve, you go through ideation, and then you have this really neat opportunity to cyclically prototype and test through more of an evaluative research approach. So here, you have a solution in mind, you get it in front of your users, you ask them what they think, maybe you tweak it, you get their input again, and finally you get to a point where you're ready to build and launch. And you're not done. Once you build and launch, you're definitely not done listening. I would say it's even more important to listen then. So think about the ways that after you launch your product, after you launch your service or new process, how you're going to continue to listen and welcome feedback from your users to plug back into the beginning of your process and learn from that and maybe ideate some more and follow through on this design or design thinking workflow. So at this point, it's kind of the basics of listening and research in EX design. I would love to walk you through a real life example on how we leveraged listening to create our belonging program at Envision. But before we dive in, since you all are already doing such a great job on the listening and research front, I would love if you could just take a moment and hop into the Zoom chat and drop some examples of how you're using learning. So I have a good idea of what methods you're using, surveys, talking to folks in interviews. I would love to know what types of programs you're building with research as an input. If you just want to take a second and drop a couple of bullet points in the Zoom chat. I'll give you a couple minutes. All right, well, I hope that you are typing, and I will come back and read these later and we can circle back on that. So for our case study that I'm going to walk you through.
Marie, we did get Damon Diener contributed something.
Thank you, Damon. Oh yeah, career, skills, and learning come together. Super important. Damon, we need to chat. We're doing some similar things on our side at the moment. I would love to know what you're doing there.
Cool.
Future of work. Very nice. Employee journeys. Yes. Yes, yes. Oh, very cool. Thank you all. All right. So diving into our case study here to kind of set the stage. At Envision, we truly, truly believe in creating a space where every person feels like they belong. And this is really our mission for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a while back, we had the opportunity to explore this space in even more depth and really lean further into this mission through design. So in true designer fashion, my first step here was to outline what we knew today, outline what we needed to learn, where our gaps were, and then finally bring the team together through interesting ways that we could connect and gather further feedback, gather real life user input to really bring our quantitative data to life. So I'll walk you through how we built that program here. All right, first things first, got to build a plan, right? So I find this to be a really helpful step just for me to organize my own thoughts, make sure that I'm debunking any assumptions that I have. I think it's so easy in design to think of designing for yourself or designing with your perspective, especially because we are all employees as well. Like, we are the user to a degree, but it's so important to acknowledge that folks have such different experiences within the same organization. So I like to build a plan and suss all of that out from the get-go and make sure that the questions I am asking in surveys or the questions I am asking in interviews with folks will really get to the core of user needs. So that's where I started with this project, and did so in outlining the core needs of the effort, right? Like, what were we trying to achieve as a business? What were the biggest problems that we needed to solve for our users? So that was the first thing we did. Like, what do we need to do here? And then I got really familiar with our current landscape. So we already had a wealth of data. We run engagement surveys regularly, and we also have a lot of different ad hoc feedback inputs. So I took a look at all of that over the past couple of years to really get a sense of what's going on in the belonging space today. So it's my desk research, that was my prep, to get an understanding of where we needed to go learn more. So once I knew that, I was able to clarify our needed insights and how we were going to use this data to go take action. So I got really specific on the things that we needed to know and how we would use our research to inform this project moving forward. And then finally, I chose my methods and how I was going to go interact with folks. So we already had a wealth of more quantitative data. So I wanted to complement that with more qualitative data and get deeper on that human side, on the human perspective of our employees at Envision. So once I had all of that outlined, I knew what we were going to go do. I got buy-in from some of our stakeholders to make sure I was going to meet their needs. Went into full discovery mode. So the method that I chose to go with for this was interviews. So I interviewed our stakeholders, I interviewed managers, I interviewed employees to figure out, what was happening in their space. And as I was writing the script and kind of pulling all of the research together on the landscape side, this really cool realization kind of emerged here. And as we were leveraging listening to learn, this was such a cool opportunity to really show rather than tell folks that we believe in belonging, simply by creating space to hear what they had to say and see from their perspective and welcome them into the conversation. So this is a really neat opportunity to get pretty deep on what belonging means to them. So rather than just focusing on DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion program outputs, I wanted to go a little bit further than that, zoom out a little bit, and really talk about belonging and what it means for someone to belong. And what are those experiences that have been great, where you really felt like you belong? And what are those experiences where maybe you haven't? Like, we've all had an experience where we've felt really excluded in our lives before. And that's what I wanted to talk to folks about, to really understand the DNA of belonging in the workplace. And as with every interview I have ever done, I will say, so many rich, meaningful conversations happened and just deep connection with people. And I always walk away with a deeper understanding, a completely different perspective, and learn something new that I never would have known had I not asked. So these interviews were incredibly powerful and really set the stage for where we wanted to go with belonging at Envision. So once we had all of our data collected, we had the quantitative data from our engagement surveys and other ad hoc inputs. We had our qualitative, really rich qualitative data from talking to folks one-to-one, welcoming them into our process. We had to synthesize it. There's so much opportunity in this space, as there is with many of the milestones within the employee experience journey. We needed to focus in on what the biggest themes were here and where we could make the most impact. So went through a really fun, I'll say fun. Hopefully you all are with me that analyzing data is fun, but went through a really fun exercise to look for those themes, look for patterns in the research and the data points that we had that were disparate and kind of all over the board, and brought that all together to identify a few key themes that actually informed our action plan. So from this research, we were able to deeply connect with folks. We learned so much from welcoming them into our process, and it gave us great fodder to move forward and take action. So from this, we were able to create a comprehensive strategy. We put goals in place. We have initiatives that ladder directly up to that strategy, and we have a roadmap. And what I'll say I'm most proud of, and what our team is most proud of, is not that we have strategy or action or initiatives, but that through this process, we can say that Envisioner voices from across the organization are represented here, and that they helped us build this. So it was really built by the people of Envision for the people of Envision. And I think that is important with any program, but particularly important with regard to the subject of belonging, with regard to diversity, with regard to inclusion, and with regard to equity. So that was an incredibly cool and meaningful takeaway that we had from this effort. So we have our actions in place. We've been building towards those over time. And a key piece of our whole listening strategy here is to follow up. We have to measure. We have to understand the things that we're putting in place tactically and if they are working. So we have key performance indicators in place. We've kept our doors open for feedback. I still regularly connect with many of the folks who I interviewed in the first place, and they've become some of the biggest champions for diversity, equity, and inclusion that we have. So my biggest takeaway here is just to keep listening, keep inviting folks in, keep coming up with new ways to let their voices be heard. And this is something we're really digging into this year through the lens of people insights. So taking our deep data and information and pairing that with a voice of employee program that we will be building towards over time, which is super exciting. All right. That was my story on how we are leveraging listening at Envision for this particular program. So I'd quickly like to share a couple of ways that you can get started today, which it sounds like you all are already pros. You're already doing this in your day-to-day. So would love to share this out and then really open up the conversation to learn more about what you're doing today. So if you have not started yet, or if you're doing more of the quantitative data and want to start introducing qualitative data, start with one program at a time. And I would say start small. That's where we started a couple of years ago, and a smaller effort that we didn't know much about, frankly. So the research would really help us better understand the space, focusing on quality first. So experimenting a little bit with those research methods, right? Like maybe you try an interview, maybe you try a focus group, maybe you have someone do a diary study over a few days. Try it and see how it works for you. You'll start to get a feel for what types of research pair best with the types of things you need to learn and the types of programs that you're creating. But most importantly, like, leverage a method to help you debunk your assumptions. That's what really research is all about, and connecting with your users. And then finally, leverage this as an opportunity to co-create and bring folks along with you through this process. I think that is one of the most powerful things design can do as a whole, is bring diverse perspectives together. And as you do that, the more you involve folks, including your users, the more you design in a participatory fashion with folks, the better your solution will be. I'll say that first. And then the more folks will be there to champion your cause with you and to be advocates for whatever you're creating across the company. And as you start small, eventually you'll be able to build up and really connect your end-to-end employee experience through this, which is just a really neat opportunity for our industry to start thinking through how all of these moments connect, what happens in those in-between moments, how do we make those valuable as well? And it just starts with listening. So thank you all for joining. Thank you for your time this morning and for listening to my story and for sharing a little bit about what you were doing. That was lovely to learn about that. I am always up to chat. You can email me directly, or you can find me on LinkedIn, and would love to hear more about what you're doing.
Thanks, Marie. And thanks for always being so accessible. Marie truly is one of the most best teachers and good illustrators of how all this works. So any questions for Marie? You can type them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question directly. So Connie Pichal is asking if you've done work around scaling EX work across your business, training or empower people managers or HR teams, etc.
Yes, this is a really great question. Yes, so within our HR team, we have a core center of excellence around people experience. So our team focuses on the end-to-end employee experience, as well as internal communications, employer branding. You can kind of think of us as an internal go-to-market arm, as well as employee experience strategy. So we partner really closely with our broader people team across their subject matter expertise. And in doing that, we do a lot of teaching and training throughout. So folks have design in their vocabulary. We have a common language for that. And I mean, our team is fantastic. They are always championing the user needs as they're creating. And then, yes, we do expand that beyond our team as well. So for example, with our engagement survey, we really want to empower leaders at all levels of the business to own that and to own those insights. And we want to partner with them on how they can best take action and, create the best in-team experiences that they can. So the more we can radiate out, the better. Another question here. What would you single out as the most important barriers to overcome when introducing research/listening-based approaches? Number one, time. I think design faces this generally, and then research in particular often feels like a bottleneck or a slowdown for projects and process. So the more you can get quick and lean and do just enough research, the better. So lean into your desk research and prep, pull from as much as you already have, and then get super clear on what gaps exist and where you might need to go learn more. And then as you go learn more, do so with agility. So within these projects that I do, I usually commit to at most a week of research, like for the end-to-end process of like coming up with the plan, talking to folks, executing that research, analyzing it, and walking away with key insights. I've also done that in shorter cycles. So I will take a few hours and just do back-to-back interviews with folks and have all my prep done before that so I can move quickly there. And I find it to be helpful actually to like do it all at once, because then you already start to have some of those themes in mind as you go to aggregate and analyze what you've come up with. It's a great question.
Marie, where have you learned to do your research? Where do you go for information or?
Yeah. Oh, there are so many great resources out in the world today. So I typically lean more on the design side to learn from that. But I also complement that with a lot of more traditional HR insight. So on the design side, love Nielsen Norman Group. I
Mm-hmm.
pulled from a lot of service design as well. So I have service design in my background. I actually, this is so geeky. I love this book. It sits on my desk all the time. So this is service design. Yes, Elliot.
All of little Post-its.
Yes. Oh, that's super funny. So love that book as well. And then there are lots of fantastic UX design focused researchers out in the world. Yes, Damon. Oh, this is so great. This is making my week. And then on the HR side, Culture Amp shares a ton of great research on the employee experience end to end. Qualtrics also has great information out there. Who else? Glint and Lattice have some good information too. And that's just a really interesting and different approach. So I kind of marry the two of those together.
Great, thanks. Got another question from Daphne here. Who did you involve in the research? Did you do the interviews or did you invite others to conduct them?
Yes. So this is a really good question. I involved my immediate team. So I worked with our head of people. I worked with my fantastic boss, Jen, on what this looked like for our team, like what we needed to know. We made sure we had our executive leadership team's input as well, as far as like what they were thinking they wanted this program to be. And then we talked to folks from across the company. So one really important thing, thank you for asking this, Daphne, because I did not talk about this, and something that I think is very important, given the types of topics we are researching on. I did not go tap people on the shoulder and ask them to participate. I kind of created an open forum where folks could opt in to participate. And I think that was particularly important given this topic and this subject matter. So that's something I think about a lot, but we had many folks opt in to participate. I think I talked to, actually I wound up being like close to 20 or 30 people. I set out to talk to like about 5 in each role level and different departments across the organization. And folks were really excited about this topic. So I ended up talking to many more, which was just delightful. But we tried to be really thoughtful about capturing across departments, across demographics, across role levels and leadership, across geographic areas to get a holistic view of what our folks are experiencing.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for your answer. I mean, that absolutely makes sense. For me, right, I would definitely consider involving the business in conducting the same interviews, because if you talk about such a topic like belonging, right, which really gets to the heart, if you ask the business to conduct these interviews themselves, and of course you have to prep them, I would strongly believe you would build some sponsorship in there. So that was the reason for my question, but thanks for your answer. It was helpful.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Kind of democratizing design and research in that way, I think could be really powerful.
And Marie, I remember you shared with me some personal examples of how it was to talk with these people and the kinds of questions you ask and what level of openness that got you to. Maybe if you could comment on that for a moment. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah. It's interesting to talk to folks about something that can be deeply personal and to do so with a warmth and friendliness, but also objectivity as we have to bring to the table through research. So through some of my other work, I actually know a ton of folks within Envision, which is nice for me. It's easy to get participants to kind of come join me just for a chat. But I would say this was a really interesting topic, and I tried to be as hands off as I could and to follow their lead in the conversation. So one thing that I've gotten very comfortable with in conducting interviews is sitting with silence. And I think just that extra pause, folks will end up sharing so much more with you and really take the lead in that conversation. And some people shared some really deep and personal stories. Some folks really just were grateful that we were even asking about this and that we cared enough to broach this topic and invest in it by taking time to understand their perspective. And that was even, I will say, a little bit emotional for some people, which was, of course, the same for me, which was just, it was an incredible experience, and probably I will never forget this set of research that we did on this.
Thank you. We have a couple other questions from Nuno and from Geese. So from Nuno, how do you make employees that usually do not share the same mindsets and way of working as design thinking professionals, for example, to buy in, participate actively on the things that you had to go through, the methods?
Yeah. Well, this is something I've been building towards for a few years. And I will say this is real, right? Like coming into a people organization or coming into an HR organization and saying, hey, let's do things in a totally different way than we've done them before. Just with any type of change management, I think you need to show your value early and quickly and in small ways. So that's what I've done for folks. Been a great partner. So be a great partner to them, bring them with you rather than just telling them what you think. I think inviting them into the conversation, and I will say, like, elevating that collaboration, right? Like, this is a long game, building those relationships for long term to really build up an EX practice in your department. It might take a while, and there will be wins and there will be struggles. But I think if you can show your value early and bring folks along with you, you'll get there.
Great. And then I don't know if you can see this last question from Geese.
How have you experienced using the empathize phase to be in itself an approach to navigate culture? Geese, do you want to tell me more about this question? I think this is really interesting and deep. I just want to make sure I answer it in the right way.
I think it's not just about data collection. So the moment you enter a system and have a conversation in itself becomes a culture intervention. So, and I think it's maybe using some of the methodologies or approaches you've used to actually start seeing shifts in culture while you're doing the empathizing phase.
Yes. You're right on. Just the act in and of itself, like bringing folks in, creating channels for listening across the business. So like, even if it doesn't pertain to a particular product or service or program that you're creating mechanisms to hear folks and make sure that you are taking their perspective into account can be deeply impactful to the culture. Folks start to feel significantly more empowered. They feel heard and invested in and valued, and that can shift the culture. And I think we've seen pockets of that, particularly with this belonging work. We've leveraged this for some other pockets of work too, and those are some of our most successful efforts because we did it together, right? We built it as one.
Thanks so much. Marie, I have one final question. A lot of us have had DE&I or diversity, equity, and inclusion in our organizations or made that attempt. What are some key ways in terms of what results you had or what your outputs were that you found that were fundamentally different using this approach as opposed to what we've done in the past?
Yeah. I would say we went so deep on the belonging side that instead of just coming up with quick win, short-term focused solutions, we were able to come up with a long-term strategy that we could build towards over time and balance that with short-term, like immediate value type actions.
Yeah.
So for us, leveraging this process gave us clarity in how we can take action in the short term and build with the end in mind, right? So we're not going to be able to accomplish significant impact or change in 6 months, but we can add a ton of value in that short term that is aligned to where we want to go eventually.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think this brings us to the end of our time. I want to thank you, Marie, so much for sharing this today. And I think all of you kind of had this experience. When I've talked to Marie in the past, I've always thought, I wish more people could hear the way she thinks about this, the way she does this. So this was really fun to be able to have others listening in. And thank you all for your participation today. We'll start up our next session in about 13 minutes. If you want to join, Andrew Merritt and I will talk about a study that he's done and really show some really interesting and kind of new approaches to research, especially with what Marie was talking about on the qualitative side. So that was actually a nice lead in to this, because Andrew goes into how do you understand at scale the why in research.
Oh, super cool.
So thank you again, and see you all soon.
Thank you, Elliot. Thank you all.